Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Freedom to Flourish podcast. I'm Dr. Joel here with Dr. Tim. Today, we're getting into thyroid. This podcast here is for the patient struggling with thyroid issues and for the common person just wanting to learn more about thyroid health. So we're going to get into a lot of things with the thyroid, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Dr. Tim, how are you doing today?
Good. Happy to get this done. Looking forward to it. Thyroid is one of the most common things that I'm sure you see in your office as well as myself. So many people come in where they have this chronic fatigue. They just don't feel right. They have weight gain they just can't shed any weight. There's lots of different things that will point to a thyroid issue, and the problem is these people will go the medical route with things first. They go to their PCP or endocrinologist and they say your blood work is fine, in quotes, it's fine.
Yep.
But when we look at it through our narrowed lab ranges, things are not quite fine. They are a
Yeah.
functional issue rather than a pathologic issue most of the time. There are some other patterns that we will talk about in the future. Today, we're just going to talk about the functional issues, all the things that kind of play into it, and what things you pay attention to and deal with that on your own at home. So really looking
Yeah.
forward to it. There's a lot of stuff that we can do with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, the whole lab work topic of running lab work and everything comes back normal. So many patients come in with that story, and it's not just with thyroid, right? It's with other energy fatigue issues, anemic issues, cholesterol issues, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that come up there, and that's why we really like to use. You mentioned the narrow ranges. I call them optimal ranges or functional ranges. I know you use that too, but whenever we're talking about lab ranges, essentially the way that I describe it to patients, I'm curious if you describe it a different way, Dr. Tim. But essentially, I'll say, hey, the lab ranges, the standard ranges, are really too big to look at optimal functioning, and really what you want to do is you want to take depends on the lab, but you generally want to take 1 to 2 standard deviations in on the lab range, and that's going to be more of your optimal or functional range. So it's when a lot of people fall in between the optimal range. They're outside of that, but they're still inside the narrow range that they're still considered normal and healthy. So, Dr. Tim, let's jump into the thyroid here. Comes in, they have thyroid issues, things that they're likely complaining of.
Yeah, so somebody is having thyroid issues. I would say more often than not, people that call in that suspect they have a thyroid issue, it is a hypothyroid. The only real time that you see a hyperthyroid is typically in an autoimmune case where patients will have Graves' disease, and we'll talk about that in the future. But if you're a thyroid issue as a whole, that is downregulation or hypothyroid, typically the symptoms that are going to go along with that are fatigue, weight gain, or inability to lose weight, uh, lack of energy. You're tired, can't get up, spring up out of bed in the morning. You just feel like you're dragging through your day. There could be women's cycle disruption there due to hormones are involved. Plenty of things that play into the thyroid. At the end of the day, the thyroid is essentially the furnace for your body. So if there's enough gas going into the furnace to burn and light that fire, you're not going to have the energy. You're not going to have the increase in metabolic function to produce energy, heat, weight loss, all those things. So it's a disease or dysfunction that has to do with a lack of energy production by your body, which leads to fatigue. So um, that's typically how you can kind of spot if you have low thyroid function. If it's more so on the high thyroid function side of things, it's going to be more so the opposite of that. So you run really hot, you're going to want the air conditioning blowing on full blast, even if it's winter. Um, you're going to be jittery, super stressed out all the time, trouble sleeping and calming down, high blood pressure, high heart rate. All those things line up with Graves' disease or autoimmune hyperthyroid. As far as the medical intervention for that, there's the medications that directly affect the thyroid, but in those patients that have the hyperthyroid, they'll often get put on like a beta blocker or other medications that will help manage the high blood pressure and high heart rate. So that's a big component there that I actually currently have a patient who's going through that process and going well, but the heart rate is one of those things that you really have to pay attention to and make sure that it's not too high and uncomfortable for the patient. So it's more so like the higher end of the range for sure. That's the two main things. There's the low side where you're just cold, tired, no energy, weight gain, all that stuff. And then there's the high end where it's the opposite. You're hot, you lose a ton of weight, can't keep it on. You're just running all around the place and have all this super hyper energy all the time. So generally, that's how it goes. Low thyroid function, low energy, high thyroid function, high energy. And with that, the metabolic effects of that, where you'll get either weight gain or weight loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And for the listeners here, I have a lot of patients, I'm sure you do too, Dr. Tim, that get the hyper and hypo component confused. So the way that I encourage people to think about that is hypo rhymes with low. So hypothyroidism is going to be low thyroid, whereas hyper is like hyperactive. And so that's your hyperactive thyroid. So along with the brain fog, along with the fatigue and weight gain and poor metabolism, usually patients will also be complaining of brain fog issues where they just feel like their brain is not functioning very actively, and that has to do with acetylcholine and its functions with the thyroid hormones. And then, having hypothyroid issues, you'll usually also have issues with your hair thinning or even falling out, and obviously that's been a big thing with thyroid issues. It's been something people have experienced with COVID as well, after getting COVID. And a lot of that actually ties in with the thyroid as well. And then your skin that's really dry, that can be due to hypothyroidism. I think the last thing I would mention too is just like poor digestion and slow bowels, because your thyroid is one of the things that, yes, it increases metabolism, but it also stimulates your digestive system to function well. So if if your thyroid is struggling, then your digestive system is going to be a little bit slower. You can be more prone to constipation and things like that. So, you touched a little bit on Graves' disease, right? Which is, you know, the Graves' disease is one of those conditions that our medical system has failed us the most because, like you said, when doctors see these patients, they're usually wanting to manage the symptoms of the heart, the high blood pressure, the high pulse, and all those things. When in reality, it really has nothing to do with the heart. The heart is the victim here. It really has to do with your immune system. And so, if we can actually focus on healing and balancing your immune system, then the Graves' disease, that autoimmune condition, will actually calm down. Your thyroid can then relax a little bit. So we're going to get into some other conditions in the future, talking about Hashimoto's, right? That autoimmune condition, where your immune system is attacking your thyroid and actually causing a suppressed function of your thyroid. We're going to get into that in the future as well. But today we're going to talk about one of the main thyroid patterns that we see, which is the functional hypothyroid pattern. The functional hypothyroid pattern. So, when we talk about functional in regards to lab work, this primarily is where we get into talking about the labs come back and they're not necessarily high or low according to those standard ranges. But once we use our optimal ranges and looking at things functionally, we see things that are off with that. Um, Dr. Tim, tell me a little bit more about what you're generally looking for in regards to the functional hypothyroid patterns, and share a little bit more on that topic.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to the functional hypothyroid, one of the dead giveaways that's even an option is so you have your whole thyroid hormone pathway. There's a bunch of different hormones and things that go on there. It starts at the top with TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. TSH is sent to the thyroid by the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland lies in your brain, and it responds to what it's told to do by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is super sensitive to what goes on all throughout your body. So, if you're stressed, if you're not eating enough, if you have all this, some infection going on, all these inflammatory drivers affecting it, it can tell the pituitary to produce less thyroid stimulating hormone to then have your thyroid downregulate, thus producing less energy and causing you to calm down and want to lay on the couch and do nothing. I always use the analogy of whenever you get the flu, what do you want to do? You get fatigued, you want to lay down and sleep all day. It's an acute reaction where your body is dealing with some serious inflammation, some serious immune response that it needs to mount an attack on, and it needs to conserve resources. Um, in the case of these patients, that TSH number runs a little bit low chronically, leading to chronic issues where thyroid hormones are going to run low. It's not like something where you get the flu and then 3 days later you bounce right back. It's a chronic issue at that point. So back to that number TSH. Ideally, the range in which I like to see that is 1.8 to 3. If it's anything above, you might be moving towards that hyperthyroid Graves' disease stage. There's some other things that could be going on there. If you run low, below that 1.8, typically that's a good indicator that you're dealing with a hypothyroid or a functional hypothyroid. I actually just misspoke on TSH going high. That's more the Hashimoto's side of things. When TSH runs low, that's more the Graves' disease issue with the autoimmunity. But when things creep a little lower than 1.8, typically that's just an indication that your brain is telling your thyroid to slow down due to some sort of inflammation or some sort of stress. From there, so that's the range for TSH, 1.8 to 3. A little bit low is the functional hypothyroid. Because your brain is telling your thyroid to produce less, it makes sense that the thyroid begins to produce less. As far as it goes for free T4 and free T3, free T4, I like to see between 1 and 2. And then free T3, I like to see between 3 and 4. Those are going to be the more active, usable forms of thyroid hormones that are free to be used. T3 is the one that does most of the work and that the body responds to most. So with that, you might see where there's maybe a little bit of a conversion issue, things like that going on there. But the main gist with the functional hypothyroid is low TSH, low free T4, and low free T3. You can also see it where T4 is kind of holding out a little bit and T3 is a little low. We don't necessarily look at it as cut and dry. So if they're on the lower end of the functional range, we still might say, okay, this is the direction that you're heading. And maybe for you, this is considered hypothyroid functionally. Every patient's different. So if their signs and symptoms are aligning with a functional hypothyroid and things are way on the low end of the range, but still normal to our functional ranges, that just doesn't quite make sense that they're normal. There's things that, it's not always black and white. So we have to look at that and assess, do the symptoms line up with what's going on? And if they do, and we can kind of rationalize what's going on there, do the symptoms align with this, and then go from there. So generally, functional hypothyroid is low TSH, low free T3, and then low free T4, T4, then T3, leading to that fatigue and then decreased metabolic output.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thanks for going through all that. Absolutely. That's one of the most common functional hypothyroid patterns that we will see on the lab work. We'll talk about other patterns that we see as well as far as thyroid issues go, but we'll keep it simple to this today. Let's jump into the things that we see cause the most dysfunction with the thyroid. And when we talk about these, think about for the listener, if you do struggle with thyroid issues, you have issues with metabolism and weight loss, maybe you have issues with just energy in general, maybe you have issues with hair thinning or hair loss or dry skin. If that's you, think about these issues as we talk through things and we talk through these drivers that are basically going to be impacting your metabolism, going to be impacting your energy. I would say that the top two that I would see is going to be high stress hormones, specifically cortisol, which, by the way, we spent a decent amount of time talking about that in episode 2, stress and anxiety. Would definitely encourage you to check that one out if you haven't yet. But high cortisol and stress hormones, inflammation is probably there at number 2. I would say anemic issues are also extremely common. And so when we talk about anemia, that could be an iron deficiency. It could be a B9 deficiency, could be B6 or B12. And so it could be an anemic issue. Um, Another thing that I'll often see, and this is probably under the umbrella of inflammation, which so many things go under that umbrella of inflammation. We should probably make our just one episode directly focused on inflammation and those sources there. But I would say gut dysbiosis is a thing that I'll commonly see in practice as well. It's very common to see some kind of SIBO issue, that small intestine bacterial overgrowth, or even a fungal overgrowth issue in the gut that's impacting the thyroid. And I've even had patients where, as we're working through things, and it ends up being a gut issue, we address those things. They follow the nutrition plan well, and they come back in 2 to 3 weeks and they've dropped 10 pounds. And months later, they still haven't gained that 10 pounds back. So it's amazing how sometimes when you address those underlying issues, the gut dysbiosis, the high cortisol and stress hormones, the inflammation, you address those things, and the thyroid will actually function well. Um, what are some other things that you would add to that? I know that I'm sure you see a lot of high stress hormone issues and inflammation. Anything else, anything specific there that you've seen a decent amount with patients, Dr. Tim?
Yeah, gut inflammation is definitely at the top of that list. The dysbiosis. Whenever I'm checking for functional hypothyroid issues or just thyroid issues in general, gut is typically way at the top of the list. Whenever I'm tying indicators together and just kind of seeing where everything connects and goes down one pathway, um, a lot of things typically go back to the gut. Doesn't mean that that's always the case.
Hmm.
In other times, I will see things like metals. Metals are a very common thing for not only thyroid issues, but just autoimmunity in general. I'll see that more so as an issue when it comes to autoimmune thyroid. Um, Allergies, chronic infections, things like that can play into it, um, and absolutely are underlying drivers. It is not typically the glaringly obvious top of the priority list thing that I see though. I would definitely say gut, metals, um, mold. Mold is up there as well. Um, all those things are going to be pretty higher on the list. And then as you're, eliminating that big chunk of, whatever might be taking up 60% of the pie chart leading to the issue is, the next thing on the list is always going to be underlying infections, um, allergies, all that other stuff that goes in there as well. But like I said, tying things directly into it, gut, metals, huge, huge, huge at the top of that list.
Yeah, for sure. I know that we often see, as you're talking, there's some more things that came to mind. Mold toxicity issues can definitely run down your thyroid. It's going to cause a lot of issues in your system, but definitely can be impacting your thyroid. You talked about the allergies and the infections. Sugar and just a diet nutrition that's full of processed foods can certainly lead to just a ton of inflammation between all the chemicals and preservatives and things like that in those foods. And again, I talk about this a lot, but whole foods are so important with addressing those things and just having a solid foundation of getting the right nutrients in your body and holding on to those. So, Dr. Tim, let's jump into addressing these things. I know we talk a lot about nutrition, as nutrition is so important for health. We talk about lifestyle and things like that as well. Um, I know that one of the um, most important things that obviously we would say, and common sense would say, is no matter whatever the primary driver is of dysfunction, obviously we have to address that. And I think that's where it can get really tricky for figuring out these thyroid issues, because if it is high cortisol, then that's one thing. If it's a gut issue, that's another thing. And usually patients aren't really kind of identifying those things themselves. But to the listener, if let's kind of walk through that together. If you do struggle with stress in general, cortisol is an issue, then that's definitely something to kind of pay attention to as we talk about how to address that. If inflammation in general is an issue, then kind of pay attention to the things that we talk about in regards to that. One thing I did want to mention as far as the gut issues is generally signs of SIBO or SIFO or other gut issues. stomach or abdominal would be one. But another common couple of things I see is bloating and gas. If you have bloating or gas, the majority of the time it's some kind of imbalance there with the bacteria or fungus in your gut. You can certainly have parasites and viruses as well, but I would say viruses are generally less common with things. Um, and then, yeah, so the bloating, the gas, if you just eat food and you don't feel like you don't feel well afterwards, that's generally a good indication that you have some kind of gut dysbiosis, some kind of poor digestion issue. And that could be actually something that's kind of driving your thyroid issues. Now, I've seen this so many times, Dr. Tim. I'm sure you have in practice and then in personal life as well, where you have it usually ends up being the women that just go through a season of life that's extremely stressful and they put on so much weight. For the listener, that's primarily your cortisol. That's just shooting through the roof, and that cortisol is running down that thyroid. Again, we talked about cortisol quite a bit in our second episode, but Dr. Tim, walk us through your favorite steps to approach those high cortisol issues. And then, walk us through some of the other things that you like to address when it comes to the thyroid as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully I don't sound like a broken record here. If this is your first episode that you're listening in, it'll sound new to you. But if it's not, and you've been a lot with us along the way with the first two episodes, this is going to be a bit familiar. So in order to address high cortisol, you need to regulate the diet. So the number one driver of high stress is that chemical component of stress, which is blood sugar related. So when blood sugar runs low chronically, usually due to not eating enough, what will happen is in order to prop blood sugar up to the optimal range of 85 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, your adrenals will contract, producing cortisol. It then brings your blood sugar up. Then from there, you can ride that wave for a little while, and then you might need some caffeine, you'll crash, whatever it may be. But the way that we could combat this chronic, having your adrenals contract, this chronic surge of cortisol, is eating properly. By In order to do that, what you have to do is eat. The ideal way is to eat 3 meals a day, 5 hours apart, no snacking between. You eliminate processed sugars, at least 35-ish grams of protein per meal, at least 30 grams of fat, and then carbs to carb tolerance. And by that, I mean if you eat so many carbs that you feel tired after your meal, you had too much. So at the next meal or say at lunch, you felt tired afterwards and you had 100 grams of carbs. Tomorrow at lunch, let's try 75. See if you can tolerate that. The rise in insulin levels, where your body through your pancreas secretes insulin to bring blood sugar down, makes you tired. So the indication that you had too many is tiredness as it relates to insulin. So that's the rule there as far as it goes for managing stress at a chemical standpoint. There's some other things that you can do as far as it goes for meditation, mindfulness, taking a break and just doing some breath work, things like that might calm you down when you are actively ramping yourself up beyond in ways that you can control. Say you had a stressful phone call at work, or family members not doing well, there's drama going on somewhere in your life where you are ramped up. Taking the time to be present and just breathe and calm down, that can go a long way. But if there's a chronic issue that's underlying, leading to stress hormone production due to some chemical factor, it's kind of hard to manage that other stuff. So that leads kind of the next thing, where you can do everything you can to eat properly, and for some reason you might still not feel right. So you got to be able to try to be tolerant to things going on in life. You have to not overtrain. So if you are an Ironman athlete or a marathon runner or a bodybuilder, and you're gearing up for competition, you're probably not going to do yourself any favors as far as it goes for managing stress, because usually in those situations, at least with a bodybuilding sense, people will be decreasing the number of calories that they're eating and just riding all kinds of stress hormones to the point where at some point they're going to plateau because their thyroid is down regulating so much, and they have to decrease calories even more. And so you're just constantly driving yourself into this state of more and more stress while training a ton and not providing your body resources to repair itself. So, in order to manage stress as a whole, you got to kind of prioritize and understand where your stress tolerance is. We always like to use that word tolerance, stress tolerance, immune tolerance, um, all kinds of tolerances that we like to talk about. So in this case, stress tolerance encompasses emotional stress, um, chemical stress, and then physical stress. So you have to kind of find a balance where if you're really expended somewhere emotionally, if you're having issues with your family or your partner, whatever it may be, you might not have as much room to give on the chemical and physical side where you need to dial back training a little bit and really hunker down and eat properly for a little while to make sure that you can kind of weather that storm and not have issues arise because of it. Same goes if you're kind of overtraining and really gearing up for competition. You need to make sure that you're doing the best you can to not cause any emotional stress and really nail the diet stuff. Um, in all cases, I really see that people who correct the diet and eat properly, they do well. Most people don't know how to eat properly, and it's a whole lot more food than they think. But the whole goal is to get your body to the point of thriving rather than survival. So that as a whole, that's the dietary component to manage the chemical stress. With that, you can also employ the use of adaptogenic herbs like rhodiola root, ashwagandha, holy basil. Some kind of argue milk thistle is also an adaptogen. American ginseng, that's a good one. All kinds of herbs that have adaptogenic functions or uses are great for that. So if your energy is really low, they'll help bring you up. And if your energy is really high and you're really stressed, they help bring you down. So it's kind of just a general adrenal regulator. And there's a lot of patients that I see that, I kind of give them that option and say, okay, if you're really not feeling too bad, and you don't think you need it, then don't worry about it. But there's others that once they start taking it and they feel a whole lot better, they like to stay on it just because they know they're doing the best they can to manage all the other stressors in their life, that they need a little bit of a supportive element in there to help them get through. Um, in some cases where stress hormones show up as to be a primary offender to an organ, we will see adaptogens test as being the primary nutrient in that case as well. But usually they're pretty supportive in the case of stress and how it relates to the thyroid. Um, that's that's pretty much as far as I would go with the chemical stress component of the hypothyroid or functional hypothyroid. As far as it goes for inflammatory, there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. And I wish it was as cut and dry as saying, okay, you need to do this diet and you're going to be great. But that's where the diet stuff can be a whole lot more simple. The inflammatory side is trickier. And that's kind of where we come in. Um, of course, sugars, bad fats, um, all those things are easier, I would say, for patients to manage on their own by the diet stuff, no processed sugars, eliminating seed oils, trans fats, all those things. Um, but in regards to gut inflammation or metal toxicity, I mean, you can get a water filter, but if you have this chronic buildup of metals, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to get those out of there on your own without being on something for a long time, such as glutathione or other antioxidants that can kind of pull those out of there. And who's to say that's even the issue? It's really difficult to identify on your own. With gut inflammation, a lot of people will do things like carnivore. They'll get rid of all the inflammatory grains, and they'll essentially starve what is the overgrown, problematic component of the microbiome to where it can't thrive, and you don't experience bloating. There's less inflammation, but as soon as you start adding things back in there, issues resume. So it's not really a lasting fix. So my best advice would be, do your research and try to find somebody that you can work with in your local area to kind of help you dial these things in, because we can help you with the dietary component and say do this at home. We can help you with the supportive component of maybe some adaptogenic herbs, but with the inflammatory side, it's not as straightforward. And there's some people where it's we clean up their gut and they're great. There's other people where they have some chronic Epstein-Barr virus or Lyme or some other chronic infection that it just takes, it takes some managing over some time. So it's it's not as straightforward as you would hope with the inflammatory side, but that's not to say that there's no hope. Um, I'm sure we both, can vouch for this, that there's plenty of people that they do have these chronic infections or more difficult cases in regards to inflammatory drivers that relate to the thyroid. But as long as you stick at it with them and they keep up on things and do their best with the diet and try to mitigate stress, things will get there. Things usually do pretty well. You just got to take time and effort to get there. It's a marathon, not a sprint when it comes to thyroid things that are more inflammatory in nature rather than chemical or stress related.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think you kind of touched on something that's really actually important to talk about. You know, a lot of the times, if patients will really start with addressing the simple things on their own, they'll make so much progress. And if patients come in and if they haven't looked at nutrition, hey, we work with patients to help educate them and help them really become kind of responsible and proactive in their nutrition and really take full advantage of those benefits. And so, on the other hand, we have patients that come in, they've done all the nutrition, they have changed all the lifestyle stuff. They've made all these different changes, and they've even started on different supplements themselves, doing research and trying to figure out what's going to help them, what's going to help their thyroid and stress and inflammation, all those things. And obviously, those are the patients that we really are able to help because we're able to jump in with the systems healthcare technique and figure out exactly what's going on and kind of get to the bottom of things. So I think out of all that, I would just encourage patients, if you can really get on top of your nutrition, that's going to take you so far. Again, we talk about the whole foods diet. We talk about the dysglycemia diet that Dr. Tim has walked us through so very well. And if you can really focus on nutrition first, which I think is one of the best first steps you can take, focus on nutrition first, focus on addressing things holistically in that way so that you're lowering the inflammation, you're getting those nutrients through food. So many people find a lot of benefit just by doing that. And obviously, that's a free option as well. All it takes is some effort and some discipline and a little bit of knowledge, which hopefully we can share with you guys along the way. So yeah, if you're listening, if you've got some thyroid issues and you've been considering what to do about it, start with nutrition. Start with nutrition. That's going to help balance inflammation, and that's going to help not only your thyroid issues, it's going to help everything that you have going on in your body. So food first. Food first. Let's talk about let's jump into a little bit more with the thyroid and kind of this functional hypothyroid pattern as far as general thyroid support. So things that I see patients need so often with general thyroid support is primarily going to revolve around things like iodine, zinc, and selenium. I know there's some other things. Obviously, things like ashwagandha is very important as well. Good protein, and then addressing all of those main drivers. Dr. Tim, is there anything else that you would add that you often find that patients do really well with or that they need in regards to general thyroid support, whether it be nutrients or food, anything lifestyle that we haven't already touched on?
I guess the one you touched on pretty well there, those last couple nutrients at the end. One thing that's not, I think, as commonly talked about when it comes to thyroid health is just glutathione. So glutathione production, glutathione peroxidase, can be determined how well it works can be determined by thyroid function. So if you have a downregulated thyroid, your ability to handle oxidative stress, where you need antioxidants to fight them off or fight all those free radicals off and get them out of the system, is going to be inhibited. So if you're not producing it on your own, you need some external help. And what usually drives a significant hypothyroid issue, like we said, that inflammatory side, which is going to generate a ton of metabolic waste, a ton of free radicals, and you're going to need a ton of glutathione to help with that. And if the inflammation driving your thyroid to tell your body to produce less glutathione, how are you going to fight it off? Glutathione is essentially your body's waste management system. It's going to help clear all kinds of stuff up. You wouldn't want your trash sitting at the curb for weeks on end. and just piling up, you need something to get in there and clean it out. And because of the thyroid downregulating the production of it, it's always a good thing to supplement. Not only is it good to help with just general oxidative stress, it's a great one when it comes to metals. It's great with gut repair, mold, all those things, allergies. It's really on the list for a lot of different things because of its really strong antioxidant properties. So that's the only other thing I would add in there. Um, I think that you nailed everything else, and that was just a little side bit there. That's one of those nutrients that you're never going to do too much of because your body is always going to thank you for taking it.
Yeah. Yeah, glutathione, it's the main antioxidant in the body, and it's amazing for helping with inflammation and immune system support, and especially the thyroid. So oftentimes I know that both you and I are looking at the need for glutathione, but also the need for supporting nutrients, right? So we get into the activated B6, the P5P. We talk about magnesium. We talk about different things like glycine and cysteine whenever that's needed, 5-MTHF. There's so many other nutrients that go into glutathione support, recycling glutathione, and all of that good stuff. I know that vitamin C is also very important in that topic as well. One of the things I want to touch on was giving the listener some very basic suggestions as far as support nutritionally for the thyroid. So oftentimes the easy hitter is the selenium that's going to be found in your Brazil nuts, right? That one's pretty easy. A lot of people will mention that. Um, Other things that I would encourage as well, healthy fats is going to be super, super supportive for the thyroid. Specifically, we're talking about EPA. So you can get that in a fish oil. You can get that in fish in general, whether that's sardines or salmon or other fish like that. And then grass-fed beef, probably yours and I's favorite here, grass-fed beef. So we got the Brazil nuts, we've got the beef and the fish and the oil. Um, are there any other foods? We talk about zinc. Obviously, zinc is going to be found pretty high in oysters, but obviously that's not a very common food for people to get. And generally that one's much, much easier to supplement with. Um, Iodine obviously is going to be found in things like seaweed and things like that, but even that's kind of hard and tricky to get really good qualities of that, unless of course you're near the ocean or you live by the ocean and you can make it out there and actually breathe in that saltwater air. That can be really, really helpful. Um, are there any other foods that come to mind, Dr. Tim? I'm just trying to kind of think off the top of my head different foods that our listeners can kind of take advantage of when it comes to trying to get some of these different nutrients that are really going to support the thyroid.
Yeah. I guess the final one, which is also not a super popular one, is liver. Um,
Yeah.
Liver it has so many good nutrients in it, super dense and all the vitamins, all the minerals. You really can't go wrong with it. But like we were just saying, it's not the most common thing. It's not the tastiest thing. And if you're looking for a superfood, that's it for sure. Um, but the overarching theme with foods that we would recommend is whole foods, animal products, um, grass-fed beef, grass-fed butter, cage-free, free-range eggs, locally sourced organic meats. All those things are going to be really, really good for you. Um, you just got to make sure that you're getting it from proper sources, and then getting a nice variety of good, clean, organic veggies and all those things. And I think everybody will do good if they really nail that component, or at least take the right step forward. Um, we don't want you to be perfect right away. We just want you to, take that step forward every day. So quit buying the 97-cent eggs and switch for the bit more expensive ones. It'll be worth it in the long run. It might not be glaringly obvious, but the micro and macronutrients in there that are different in different ratios and that are actually present in grass-fed free-range eggs is it's pretty significant. So it might not appear or taste all that different, but food and whole foods, good source foods, make such a big difference when it comes to health. So I think that's a huge reason why people seem to have so many more issues nowadays than they ever have in history, because all of our food is processed and it's full of crap. So the more that you can get naturally and from good sources that you know and can go and meet the person who's dealing with it every day and harvesting it, the better. So that's my that's my soapbox on that. Know the people that are raising your food, and you'll definitely be better for it.
I love that. You had me at grass-fed butter, by the way. Um, that you're inspiring me. We're gonna have to do an episode primarily dedicated toward nutrition and what just
Excellent.
the most optimal nutrition looks like. Because I find so many patients just struggle with that. Just struggle with, okay, everybody says eat healthy, but what is healthy and what does that look like? And I find that the things that you and I have learned is so dense with nutrients and so extremely safe to eat, like the grass-fed butter, the grass-fed beef, things like that. I think that um, to us, that's absolutely normal and natural. We eat that every day. We eat it all the time. And those are the types of things that when we mention that to patients, usually they're like, really? Because so many people say butter's bad for you and that beef is bad for you. But in reality, it's not necessarily true. But a lot of it depends also on where you get it from. Is it coming from healthy cows that are grass fed, that are roaming in the pasture? Or does it come from cows that are pumped full of steroid shots and fed grains and immunizations and antibiotics and all those things. So that's obviously really important there. So we've gone through kind of just a general overview of this functional hypothyroid pattern that we see. We've talked about the main drivers of dysfunction with the thyroid. We're going to spend some episodes in the future talking about autoimmune issues with the thyroid. We'll talk about Graves' disease. We'll get into Hashimoto's a little bit, and all those good things. Um, we've talked about how we can address these things, right? So we've talked about stress, inflammation, nutrition with things like that. Um, Dr. Tim, I think that we've covered just about everything we need to, and I'm super pumped, super excited about this episode. I think people are going to get a lot of value out of it, and of course we have a lot more episodes to make here. Um, Dr. Tim, I'll have you take us home. Is there anything else that you wanted to add for us?
I think that we covered everything we need to. It's thyroid is one of the most common things that we see. So hopefully this episode didn't sound too complicated. We tried not to get too nitty gritty on some things. And one of the things that we talk about before getting into every single episode that we do is how can we break things down as simply as we can and provide the most at-home things to our audience that they can do to fix things on their own. I know there's a lot of contradictory information out there about different diets, different therapies, or different things that you can do for different conditions. But generally speaking, all of these things that play into thyroid function are just general health tips for everything. Eating properly, regulating stress, and then handling inflammation. We're going to dive into immune function and how autoimmunity arises in its own episode. But chronic inflammation is something that's going to drive autoimmunity at some point. So not only is it going to drive a functional issue with the thyroid, it can lead to some, health issues in the future. So everything that we talked about today is the path to be healthier. It just so happens to affect the thyroid because it's so sensitive to everything that goes on around it. You got to put it in this mindset of your body likes to be in a state of calm, a state of plentiful food, and low stress. And as many things as you can get off your plate that lead to low stress, emotional stress, chemical stress, all those things, as far as, and also including stress due to inflammation, the better. And this just happens to be the recipe to help with a functional hypothyroid, which undoubtedly happens when all these things are happening. So, anyway, thanks everybody for listening. This has been a great episode. Thanks for doing this with me tonight, Dr. Joel. We're looking forward to the next one. So everybody stay tuned. And if you haven't listened to prior episodes where we talked about the dysglycemia diet and how to regulate stress and anxiety through your diet more in depth, I heavily recommend that you guys go out there and do that. And yeah, we're starting real broad with things, just talking about general issues and things things you can do at home to fix them. But as we kind of progress, we're going to get going with getting it more specific on things in different conditions. So stay tuned for all
Sure.
that.
For sure. And let us know, as always, in the comments, either here on the podcast, here on Spotify, or if you find us on YouTube or social media. Let us know what you guys want to hear from next. Let us know what topics you want us to discuss, and we'll be happy to entertain those things and to jump into those things. We've got quite a list set out for us already, but we're excited. Dr. Tim, thanks for taking some time out of your evening. Tell your lovely fiance thanks as well for giving up time for that.
Will do. All right. All right. I'm Dr. Tim Augustyniak with Flourish Functional Wellness Center. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
And I'm Dr. Joel Miller here with Freedom Health and Wellness. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys in the next one.